Before the sun rose over the southern fields in 1862, a single act of defiance shattered a world built on fear. A young girl ran, barefoot, alone, and hunted, not knowing where freedom lay, only knowing she could no longer stay. By dawn, 5 men were sent to drag her back in chains. By the next morning, 4 of them were gone. No gunshot announced their fate. No witness explained what happened. There was only silence, unease, and a question that refused to disappear. How did a girl with nothing but her will undo men armed with power, numbers, and cruelty? This is not just a story about a chase. It is a story about fear changing sides, about a land that stops obeying injustice, and about the terrible price paid by those who believe freedom can be hunted down. What begins as an act of control becomes a reckoning, one that exposes how fragile oppression truly is when courage refuses to break. In the year 1862, the American South stood at the edge of collapse and conviction. War thundered in the distance, yet on one vast plantation, the planter's world still revolved around control. His authority was measured not only by acres of land or the number of people he ruled, but by his belief that nothing, and no one, could escape his grasp. When a young, enslaved girl fled before dawn, she did more than run for her life. She challenged the very idea that he was untouchable. The planter's reaction was swift and merciless. To him, her escape was not a human act of desperation, but an insult. Fear hid beneath his anger, fear that others might follow, fear that the world he depended on was slipping away. To restore order, he summoned 5 hunters, men hardened by years of tracking humans through forests and swamps. They were promised reward, respect, and the satisfaction of proving their dominance. By sending 5 instead of 1 or 2, the planter intended to make a statement. Resistance would be crushed, and hope would be punished. The hunt began before sunrise. The air was heavy, the ground damp with morning dew, and the forest thick with shadows. The hunters moved with confidence, laughing quietly, certain that the girl could not have gone far. In their minds, she was weak, young, frightened, and alone. They believed the outcome was already decided. What they did not understand was that desperation can sharpen the senses, and the desire for freedom can turn fear into focus. The girl had fled with nothing but instinct and resolve. Each step away from the plantation carried danger, yet also a fragile sense of possibility. She knew the land in a way the hunters did not as territory to conquer, but as a place to survive. She moved carefully, leaving little trace, using streams to mask her path and trees for cover. Her heart raced, but she refused to panic. Every sound mattered. Every choice could mean life or capture. As the hunters pressed deeper into the wilderness, their confidence slowly began to fracture. The forest seemed to resist them. Paths twisted, sounds echoed strangely, and familiar signs vanished. Hours passed, then more. They separated to cover more ground, believing numbers guaranteed success. Instead, distance bred unease. The laughter faded. Suspicion crept in. Each man began to feel watched, as if the land itself held its breath. By late morning, something was wrong. One hunter failed to answer a call, then another. The remaining men searched, calling out, anger turning to worry. No signs of struggle appeared. No tracks, no broken branches, no answers. The absence was unsettling, a silence heavier than any noise. The men who had begun the day as predators now felt exposed. Fear, the very thing they had used to control others, took hold of them. For the planter, waiting back at the house, time stretched painfully. He expected the girl's return by noon, broken and defeated. Instead, word reached him that 4 of the 5 hunters had vanished. The news struck like a blow. His certainty cracked. The power he had always relied on suddenly seemed fragile. The pursuit meant to restore order had revealed how easily control could unravel. The story does not linger on what became of the missing hunters. Their disappearance is not described as spectacle, but as consequence. The focus remains on the shift in balance, the moment when cruelty no longer guarantees victory. Whether through the girl's cleverness, the dangers of the wild, or the hunter's own arrogance, the hunt failed. What mattered most was not how they vanished, but why, because violence built on injustice cannot sustain itself. Emotionally, the story moves through fear, anger, and finally reckoning. The girl's fear is real and constant, yet it does not define her. Her courage grows with each mile she puts between herself and captivity. The hunter's anger masks insecurity, which later transforms into dread. The planter's rage gives way to a quiet terror, the realization that his power is neither absolute nor eternal. Several important lessons emerge from this moment. First, oppression depends on fear, but fear is unstable. Once it shifts direction, it can undo those who rely on it. Second, freedom is not passive. It demands risk, intelligence, and resilience, even from those society deems powerless. The girl's escape proves that strength is not measured by weapons or numbers, but by resolve and awareness. Finally, the story suggests a deeper moral truth. Systems built on cruelty invite their own collapse. The planter believed sending more hunters would secure control, yet it only exposed how fragile that control was. In trying to crush one act of defiance, he revealed the weakness at the heart of his authority. Cruel Pursuit Begins is not just about a chase in 1862. It is about the moment power overreaches, when fear changes sides, and when a single act of courage unsettles an entire system. The dawn that began with confidence ended in uncertainty, and from that uncertainty, the idea of freedom grew stronger. She ran not because she believed escape would be easy, but because staying meant the slow death of the spirit. In 1862, the world she fled from was built to crush hope early and completely. The plantation demanded obedience, silence, and surrender, yet something inside her refused all three. When she crossed the invisible line between captivity and the unknown, she carried no map, no weapon, and no promise of safety, only a fierce will to live free. From the first moments alone, fear followed her like a shadow. Every sound felt louder in the open land beyond the plantation. The snap of a twig, the call of distant birds, the rush of wind through leaves. She knew hunters would come. They always did. The knowledge pressed on her chest, tightening her breath. Still, she moved forward. Fear, she learned, did not mean weakness. It meant awareness, and awareness kept her alive. She trusted the land more than people. Years of quiet observation had taught her where water pooled after rain, which paths animals favored, and how to move without leaving clear signs. She avoided open ground, staying close to trees and streams. At times, exhaustion begged her to stop, to rest just a little longer. Each time she pushed on, the cost of stopping was too high. Hunger came next. Her stomach ached, her body grew lighter, and her steps slowed. She searched for berries she recognized, drank sparingly from running water, and rationed every moment of strength. Survival became a series of careful decisions. What mattered was not speed, but endurance. Not courage in grand gestures, but courage in small, repeated choices. As hours passed, the emotional weight deepened. Loneliness pressed hard. She missed familiar voices, even unkind ones, because they had at least confirmed her existence. Now, if she disappeared, no one would mark the loss. This thought could have broken her, but instead it hardened her resolve. If no one else would defend her life, she would. The hunters entered the woods with confidence, but she sensed their presence before she saw signs of them. The forest changed when danger approached. Birds went silent. The air felt tense. She altered her path again and again, doubling back, using water to hide her trail, climbing rocky ground that would confuse tracking. Every move demanded focus. Panic would undo her. Calm, even when forced, was her greatest shield. There were moments when despair nearly won. Once, as night fell, she crouched beneath thick branches, shaking from cold and fear. Tears came without permission. She thought of the certainty of capture, the punishment that awaited, the cruelty that would follow. For a heartbeat, giving up seemed easier. Then another thought rose, quiet but unbreakable. If I stop now, they decide my ending. That was unacceptable. With dawn came renewed danger and renewed strength. She moved again, despite aching muscles and blistered feet. The girl who had once obeyed out of necessity was learning something new about herself. She could endure more than she had ever been allowed to believe. Each mile was proof that she was not what they had named her. Property, weak, replaceable. She was alive, thinking, choosing. As the hunt stretched on, she noticed signs of confusion among her pursuers. Calls echoed unanswered. Movement slowed. The men who had set out with confidence now hesitated. Their fear did not come from her alone, but from the unraveling of certainty. They had expected a simple capture, not resistance that outlasted them. Her refusal to break disrupted the order they depended on. Importantly, the story does not portray her as fearless or superhuman. Her courage is human, and even fragile at times, but persistent. She is afraid, tired, and unsure. What defines her is not the absence of fear, but her decision to move despite it. This distinction carries one of the story's strongest lessons. Bravery is not a trait reserved for the powerful. It is a choice made again and again by those with the least protection. Emotionally, the story builds from terror to determination. Early fear sharpens into strategy. Loneliness transforms into self-reliance. Despair gives way to quiet confidence. By the time the pursuit falters, she has already won something greater than escape. She has proven to herself that her spirit cannot be owned. The lesson extends beyond her individual survival. Her resistance exposes the weakness of systems built on domination. They rely on compliance and predictability. When a single person refuses to play the assigned role, the system strains. When that refusal persists, cracks appear. The hunter's confusion mirrors the planter's deeper fear. That control is not natural or permanent, but enforced and therefore fragile. A girl who refuses to break is ultimately about inner freedom. Whether or not she reaches a place of physical safety, she has already crossed a greater boundary. She no longer accepts the story others wrote for her. Alone and hunted, she discovers that dignity can survive even in the harshest conditions, and that survival itself can be an act of defiance. Her journey reminds us that overwhelming odds do not define outcomes. The human will, when anchored in purpose, can endure hunger, fear, and isolation. And sometimes the most powerful victory is simply this: refusing to let cruelty decide who you are. Morning arrived quietly, almost gently, as if unaware of the dread it would reveal. Pale light filtered through the trees, lifting the darkness that had hidden movement and sound through the night. For the hunters, dawn was meant to bring advantage, clear sight, renewed confidence, and the promise of success. Instead, it delivered something far worse: uncertainty. The 5 men had entered the wilderness the day before with certainty stitched into every step. They were trackers by trade, used to commanding fear rather than feeling it. The night had slowed them, but it had not broken their belief that capture was inevitable. As the first birds called out and the mist thinned, they regrouped, expecting to finish the pursuit quickly. What they found instead was silence, thick, unsettling silence. One hunter was missing. At first, the absence seemed explainable. Perhaps the man had wandered too far while scouting. Perhaps he had chosen a different route and would soon reappear. They called out his name. The forest answered with echoes, but not with a voice. Irritation replaced concern. Time passed. No response came. As they spread out to search, confidence began to fray. Another man failed to return. Then another. The forest that once felt familiar now felt vast and watchful. The hunters stopped calling out so loudly. Voices dropped. Movements slowed. Each man became aware of his own breathing, his own isolation among trees that looked increasingly alike. By mid-morning, the truth was undeniable. 4 of the 5 hunters had vanished. There were no signs of struggle, no broken branches, no blood, no clear tracks leading away. The absence itself became terrifying. These were men accustomed to reading the land, yet the land now offered no answers. The usual logic of pursuit collapsed. The rules they depended on no longer applied. For the remaining hunter, fear arrived in waves. He felt exposed, as if the forest itself had turned its attention toward him. Every rustle sounded deliberate. Every shadow seemed to move on its own. The role he had played so comfortably, dominant, armed, in control, felt suddenly false. Without his companions, without certainty, he was simply a man alone in hostile territory. Emotionally, this was the turning point of the story. The shift from power to vulnerability happened not through a single violent moment, but through disappearance. The hunters had relied on numbers and routine. Once those were gone, so was their sense of safety. Fear, which they had used as a tool against others, now wrapped tightly around them. The girl they hunted did not need to confront them directly. Her survival depended on patience and awareness, not force. The hunter's own actions, separating overconfidence, underestimating both the land and their prey, created the conditions for their downfall. The wilderness amplified every mistake. What had been a coordinated hunt dissolved into isolated confusion. From a distance, the planter waited for news, certain the morning would bring success. Instead, the report that reached him shattered expectation. 4 men missing, no answers, no captive. His authority, once unquestioned, suddenly appeared hollow. The hunt meant to reassert dominance had instead exposed its limits. The emotional weight of this moment extends beyond fear. It carries humiliation, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. The planter feared not only the loss of men, but what the loss represented. If 5 hunters could vanish without explanation, what else might slip beyond control? What other assumptions might fail? The story does not dwell on how the hunters vanished, and that restraint is deliberate. Mystery itself becomes the message. Violence is not glorified. Instead, the disappearance serves as a mirror, reflecting the moral imbalance at the heart of the pursuit. Those who treat human lives as expendable discover how quickly certainty dissolves when order is disrupted. Important lessons emerge from this dawn. First, power that relies solely on fear is fragile. Once fear changes direction, it weakens those who wield it. Second, environments, whether forests or social systems, cannot always be dominated. They respond to arrogance with resistance. The hunters believed the land belonged to them, just as they believed the girl did. Both assumptions proved false. Another lesson lies in perspective. The hunters saw themselves as actors, others as objects. When the script flipped, they lacked the tools to adapt. Survival requires humility, awareness, and respect for uncertainty, qualities they did not cultivate. The girl, by contrast, understood uncertainty intimately and learned to move within it. Emotionally, dawn marks the collapse of illusion. Night hides fear, daylight exposes it. What seemed controlled under darkness reveals its chaos in the light. The remaining hunter's fear is raw and consuming because it strips away identity. He is no longer a hunter, he is prey, unsure where danger lies, unable to predict what comes next. The broader meaning of Dawn of Fear reaches beyond this single event. It symbolizes a moment in history when long-standing systems of domination began to crack. The year 1862 was already filled with uncertainty and upheaval. The disappearance of the hunters echoes that larger shift, a warning that no system built on cruelty is immune to collapse. In the end, dawn does not bring clarity or victory, it brings reckoning. The hunters set out believing the world would obey them. Morning reveals a different truth. Power is not absolute, control is not guaranteed, and fear is a force that can turn sharply against those who depend on it. Dawn of Fear reminds us that the greatest reversals do not always come with noise or spectacle. Sometimes they arrive quietly, one missing voice, one unanswered call, one empty space where certainty once stood. And in that silence, the balance of power changes forever. In stories of power and pursuit, justice often arrives through confrontation, one force meeting another. But in this story, justice takes a quieter, deeper form. It rises not from weapons or commands, but from the land itself. Forests, swamps, rivers, and silence become more than background. They become witnesses, and in time they become protectors. The pursuit begins with violence in its purest sense, the belief that force entitles ownership. The planter's order to hunt the runaway girl carries an unspoken assumption that the world will cooperate. Men, animals, terrain, even fate itself are expected to fall in line. For generations, this belief had gone unchallenged. The land had been cleared, worked, and exploited to serve domination. But domination leaves scars, and scars remember. As the girl enters the wilderness, nature does not greet her with comfort. Thorns tear at her skin. Mud clings to her feet. Insects swarm, cold settles into her bones, and hunger gnaws relentlessly. Nature is not gentle. It does not choose sides easily, yet it responds differently to those who move with respect rather than command. She does not try to conquer the land. She listens to it. She follows animal paths instead of forcing new ones. She uses water to erase her trail, trees to hide her body, and shadows to rest unseen. Her survival depends on humility, on understanding that the land is older, stronger, and wiser than any human claim. In return, the land does not betray her. It does not announce her presence. It absorbs her fear and carries her forward. The hunters, however, move differently. They cut through brush, leave heavy tracks, separate carelessly, and trust weapons more than awareness. To them, the forest is an obstacle to be beaten, not a system to be understood. Their confidence is rooted in violence, not balance. Every step they take assumes dominance, and slowly the land begins to resist. Paths twist unexpectedly, sounds echo in misleading ways, swamps swallow boots in slow pursuit. Mist confuses direction, night amplifies fear. The hunters grow frustrated, then careless. They divide, believing numbers no longer matter. The wilderness, indifferent to their intentions, magnifies their mistakes. This is where nature and justice quietly align. The land does not punish out of anger. It simply responds. Arrogance leads to isolation. Violence leads to vulnerability. Those who rely on fear discover that fear has no loyalty. One by one, the hunters vanish, not through spectacle, but through consequence. The environment they tried to dominate becomes the space where their power dissolves. Emotionally, this alignment carries deep weight. For the girl, nature becomes a fragile ally, not a savior but a shelter. Each moment she remains unseen feels like a whispered reassurance. You are allowed to exist. That reassurance strengthens her spirit. She is still afraid, still exhausted, but no longer alone in the way she feared. The land does not judge her worth. It simply allows her to continue. For the hunters, the emotional reversal is devastating. Their fear is not heroic or redemptive. It is disorienting. They feel watched, diminished, and exposed. The land they believed they controlled now ignores their authority. Their weapons feel heavy and useless. Their knowledge fails them. In this space, violence loses meaning. The planter, removed from the wilderness, feels the alignment in a different way. When reports come back broken and incomplete, missing men, unanswered questions, his fear is not physical but existential. The system he trusted has failed. The land did not cooperate. The violence he ordered did not restore order. Instead, it revealed how unstable his power truly was. This moment carries a powerful lesson. Oppression depends on constant enforcement. It requires systems to obey without question. But nature cannot be enslaved, and when it refuses to serve injustice, oppression begins to collapse under its own weight. Another lesson emerges about justice itself. Justice here is not revenge. The story does not celebrate suffering or glorify disappearance. Instead, it shows justice as balance restored. Those who hunted without regard for life encounter a world that does not bend to cruelty. The innocent is not elevated to dominance. She is simply allowed to survive. That alone is revolutionary. The alignment of nature and justice also exposes a moral truth. Systems of violence teach people to misunderstand strength. The hunters believed strength meant control. The girl learns strength means adaptation. The planter believed strength meant command. The land demonstrates that true power requires neither cruelty nor permission. Emotionally, the story settles into a haunting calm. There is no triumphant cheer, no clear victory parade. What remains is silence, absence, and the unsettling awareness that something irreversible has occurred. The world did not end, but it shifted. The balance tilted, if only slightly, toward dignity. This alignment speaks beyond its historical setting. It reminds us that injustice often survives by isolating people from their environments, from land, community, and empathy. When those connections are restored, even quietly, systems built on cruelty weaken. The land's refusal to cooperate becomes a metaphor for conscience itself, ignored for too long, but impossible to erase. In the end, nature does not choose sides based on innocence or guilt. It responds to behavior. Respect invites protection. Arrogance invites consequence. Violence creates instability. Harmony creates survival. Nature and justice align is not a fantasy where forests rise in anger. It is more powerful than that. It is a story where the world simply stops obeying cruelty, and when that happens, oppression begins to collapse, not because it is attacked, but because it can no longer stand. The land remains, the system does not. Freedom is often spoken of as a dream, an idea, or a promise. In this story, freedom is something far more demanding. It is dangerous, costly, and unforgiving, especially to those who try to destroy it. The haunting lesson at the heart of this moment is clear. When people chase freedom with chains, they do not merely fail to stop it. They lose pieces of themselves, their certainty, and sometimes everything they believed was secure. The pursuit begins with a lie that has been repeated for generations, the belief that freedom can be owned, managed, or denied by force. The planter believes this lie completely. To him, freedom is a threat, not a right. When the girl runs, he does not see a human being seeking safety. He sees a challenge to authority, and challenges in his world must be crushed quickly and publicly. That is why he sends hunters. Chains do not always appear as iron. Sometimes they arrive as laws, orders, money, and men trained to obey without questioning. The planter believes that by unleashing violence, he can protect his version of order. He believes the cost will be paid by the girl alone, through suffering, capture, and punishment. What he does not understand is that freedom always collects its price from those who try to imprison it. As the hunt unfolds, the cost begins to reveal itself slowly. The hunters enter the land expecting a routine task. They believe their numbers, weapons, and experience guarantee success. At first, the price seems small: fatigue, frustration, long hours in harsh terrain, but freedom does not negotiate cheaply. Every step deeper into the wilderness demands more from them. Confidence fades, fear creeps in, certainty cracks, then the losses begin. The disappearance of the hunters is not framed as spectacle or triumph, but as consequence. These men set out believing they controlled the outcome. Instead, they encounter uncertainty so complete that it strips them of identity. The cost they pay is not only physical absence. It is the destruction of the belief that they were untouchable. Freedom does not need to defeat them openly. It only needs to endure long enough for their power to collapse. For the girl, the price of freedom is different, but no less severe. She pays with hunger, exhaustion, loneliness, and constant fear. Every moment of survival demands sacrifice. She gives up rest, safety, and any illusion of comfort. There is nothing romantic about her struggle. Freedom does not reward her with ease. It tests her relentlessly. Yet the cost she pays is chosen, not imposed. That distinction matters. Emotionally, her journey is heavy. There are moments when she doubts whether freedom is worth the suffering, moments when the pain of the unknown feels worse than the certainty of captivity. But each step forward affirms something deeper. Even when freedom hurts, it preserves dignity. Chains may offer predictability, but they erase the self. Freedom, even brutal freedom, allows the self to exist. This contrast forms the core emotional tension of the story. Those who chase freedom with chains believe they are protecting stability. In truth, they are investing in destruction. The hunters lose their sense of control. The planter loses his authority. The system loses its illusion of permanence. The more force applied, the greater the cost extracted in return. The planter's loss is perhaps the most haunting of all. He does not lose just men or resources. He loses certainty. The disappearance of the hunters creates a silence that no punishment can erase. His world, once ordered and obedient, now contains unanswered questions. Fear settles where confidence once lived. That is the true price he pays, not chaos but doubt. Emotionally, this doubt is corrosive. It cannot be whipped away or commanded into silence. It lingers. If one girl can slip beyond control, what else might follow? If violence fails once, can it fail again? Freedom plants these questions like seeds. They grow quietly, reshaping the future. The lesson here is not that freedom is free, nor that violence always backfires immediately. The lesson is more unsettling. Freedom has a cost no one can avoid. Those who seek it must endure suffering. Those who try to destroy it will endure loss. The difference lies in what remains afterward. For the girl, what remains is identity. She may be scarred, changed, and uncertain of what lies ahead, but she is no longer defined by ownership. She has claimed herself. That is a victory no chain can undo. For those who hunted her, what remains is absence, of men, of certainty, of control. They chased freedom believing it could be caught, restrained, and returned to its cage. Instead, they discovered that freedom does not need to win battles to prevail. It only needs to survive long enough for oppression to exhaust itself. This lesson reaches beyond the story's setting. It speaks to every system that relies on force to deny human dignity. Violence can delay freedom, but it cannot erase it. And the longer freedom is pursued with chains, the higher the cost becomes for everyone involved. Freedom demands a price, does not offer comfort. It offers truth. Freedom is not gentle. It does not promise safety. It demands courage from the powerless and humility from the powerful. Those unwilling to pay that price honestly will pay it anyway, through loss, fear, and the slow collapse of the world they tried to control. In the end, the haunting lesson remains: freedom cannot be owned, and it cannot be hunted without consequence. Those who try will always lose more than they ever imagined. In the end, the hunt that was meant to restore power became the moment it collapsed. A planter sent 5 men into the wilderness believing fear would do what chains always had. Instead, the land swallowed certainty, the hunters vanished into silence, and a single girl proved impossible to erase. What began as cruelty turned inward, exposing how fragile domination becomes when it meets endurance, humility, and will. The girl paid dearly for her freedom, through hunger, exhaustion, and nights filled with terror, but she kept what mattered most, herself. Each step forward rewrote the lie that she was weak or owned. She learned that courage is not loud, that survival is an act of intelligence, and that dignity can endure even when safety does not. Alone, hunted, and unseen, she refused to break, and that refusal changed everything. Those who chased her paid a different price. They lost control, certainty, and the illusion that violence guarantees order. Fear shifted sides. The land stopped cooperating. Silence replaced command. And in that silence, the truth surfaced. Freedom cannot be captured, and systems built on cruelty collapse under their own weight. This story lingers not for its mystery, but for its meaning. It reminds us that justice does not always arrive with spectacle. Sometimes it arrives as consequence. That nature remembers, that courage multiplies, and that when freedom is pursued with chains, it survives anyway, leaving behind questions no power can silence, and a legacy no oppression can contain.